Good afternoon, everybody. Right time we carried on with the who killed Teresa Halbach, the suspects. So in equal second place, the suspects are Bobby Dassey, Scott Taddick, and Mike Osmond's son. Very shady how him and Bobby are so close. Why Mike Osmondson? We don't get to see hardly any of him in Making a Murderer, and yet he's one that actually does have a motive. He very much fancied Marie Avery, and Steve was Marie's preferred choice of occasional bed partner. So yes, Mike did have a motive, which is difficult to find in this case, isn't it? It's well, apart from when you get to number one on the list. But yeah, the it is interesting, isn't it, that Bobby testified at trial and Mike Osmondson didn't, and then they attributed this comment about "Would you like to help bury the body?" to Steve. Excuse me. And it was Mike Osmondson, and yet it was all completely mishandled, I would say, by Kratz, but probably deliberately so. It was all about trying to mislead the jury. Anyway, without any further ado, I've got the next bit of Wrecking Crew ready, and we'll have a read through to do with the Sakiki letter. I've made a couple of notes here. Top of my list is the fact that obviously Mike Halbach was not investigated properly when he said about the grieving process, but also the Sakiki letter was not investigated thoroughly, and yet somebody knows before they found the cremains that her body was cremated. That is very bizarre, but particularly when you consider that a lot of people made much of the fact that Stephen Avery had a crusher that was available to him. He had access to a crusher. He could have crushed the RAV4 straight away, and he could have done a lot of other things with it other than leave it on his property, because of course it wasn't him that did it. But of course, Scott Taddick, he's got access to a smelter. So let's have a look at this part of the Wrecking Crew. And we'll just give it a read through. Skinny. On the day after Steve's arrest in Manitou for Teresa's killing, a strange cryptic letter made it 30 miles north. The Green Bay post office pulled a piece of mail off their conveyor and reported it to Green Bay authorities. That piece of mail consisted of a letter without any envelope. It was folded in thirds. There was no stamp attached. The note, upon inspection, revealed that the writer indicated a body was burned up in the aluminum smelter at 3 a.m. on Friday morning. The note was signed Sakiki. The note was written in blue ink and had both printing and cursive writing in the body of the note. Indeed, the note was bizarre and baffling. One thing was certain: it was not Steve's handwriting. Was it from a crack spot, or perhaps somebody with inside knowledge of Teresa's murder? The police were never able to decipher the letter's origin. Actually, they chose to downplay its relevance. After all, if the letter pointed to somebody else instead of Steve, that would have posed a public relations nightmare of epic proportions for Manitou and Calumet counties, as well as the Wisconsin Department of Justice. These agencies wanted Avery locked up and gone. They were tired of him being the public crusader for criminal justice reform in Wisconsin. None of the bad and incompetent cops of Wisconsin wanted anything to change. They wanted to maintain status quo, and Steve's constant appearance in the press only reminded the public at large about the weaknesses and flaws in Wisconsin's fractured judicial system. As it turned out, John Deere, the Calumet investigator who interviewed Bobby, drew the assignment to follow up on the mysterious letter. He learned the mail that was being sorted in Green Bay comes from Manitowoc, Two Rivers, Green Bay, and De Pere. The Green Bay police officer, Fred Leitinen, advised that gloves were used to handle the piece of mail, and the Sakiki letter would be held at Green Bay's police department. Despite the intense statewide media feeding frenzy surrounding Avery's arrest, there had been no stories published regarding the prospect of Teresa's bones being burned. Then, 2 days after the mysterious letter, the Herald Times reporter of Manitowoc ran a front-page newspaper article explaining burnt human remains key to Halbach's SUV found on Avery's land. The mysterious letter writer had prophetically revealed body was burnt up in an aluminum smelter, 3 a.m. Friday, morn Sakiki. The odd letter was not signed with the writer's real name. Rather, it ended with the following key identifiers: Manitowoc Sheriff Avery. Finally, a dozen years later, private investigator James Kirby traveled to Manitowoc to interview Lisa Novacek, payroll employee at Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry. She also worked at the foundry in 2005 and has familiarity with her company's employees. The business has been a mainstay in Manitowoc since the early 1900s. It's tucked inside an old industrial neighborhood and remains a vibrant blue-collar operation to this day. I showed Miss Novacek the Sakiki note, which was reportedly found during sorting at the Green Bay post office. Novacek told me there were 20 people who worked the night shift at the foundry in early November 2005, and that about half of them were illiterate or partly illiterate, and that the Sakiki note could have been written by one of them. Miss Novacek told me that Scott Taddick's nickname at work in 2005 was Skinny, and that Sakiki may be a reference to Scott Taddick. There's the foundry, Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry Company, WAF, has been in Manitowoc for decades. It's where a portion of Teresa Halbach's bones and teeth may have been thrown into the industrial fire. Because we don't have a torso and we don't have any teeth. When Scott Taddick was 29, he was hauled into the Manitowoc County Jail on charges of battery, disorderly conduct, and criminal damage to property. And it would not be the only time he would end up in one of the local jails for criminal acts of violent tendencies. According to the criminal complaint, officers in nearby Two Rivers met with a woman on July 7th, 1997 at her residence. She had an altercation with her live-in boyfriend, Scott Taddick. She stated Scott had accused her of seeing another male, and she told him to leave the residence. Scott began packing up some clothing and personal items. At one point, she walked past Scott and he was swinging at the back of her head with his left hand, but he missed her. She told Scott that was the last straw, and she went into the TV room to get his duffel bag and take it to the kitchen. At that point, Scott went out of control and picked up the water cooler and slammed it down, hitting the kitchen chair and the microwave cart. She then called her mom and dad to come over because she feared for her life and her son. Scott kept making comments to her and he pushed her 2 times. Taddick decided to take out his anger and rage upon the woman's laundry. Scott went downstairs and threw all her laundry, clean and dirty, all over the basement floor and in the drain. Scott also punched her in the chest with his right fist. Scott walked back up the stairs and The victim was going to follow when Scott locked the basement door. When she opened the door, Scott punched her again. Scott's mother and father had arrived, and both she and his mother had seen Scott strike her. Scott tried to push her down the basement stairs and shut the door. When Tadek went into the garage, a fight erupted over the fishing rods. She was going to take the rods away from Scott, and he slapped her on the right arm. Scott filled up his car with his items and told his mum to get his brother. As tensions escalated, Tadek grilled his girlfriend's son, who was only a boy. Scott punched him in the upper left chest with his right fist. The boy fell to the floor and was crying. Her son is 11 years old. More chaos ensued. Scott went outside and ripped the CB out of her truck. She went into her truck to check for damage, and Scott was screaming at her, and he pulled her hair. After Scott pulled out the radio, her radio clock blinkers and backup lights would not work. At no time did she give anyone permission to damage her property. The victim's 11-year-old son gave this account to Two Rivers Police. He saw Scott pushing his mum. Scott went downstairs to get some clothes, and Scott began to throw clothes all over, and Scott tried to rip up his victim's sweatshirts. The boy stated he was fearful Scott would hurt his mum. Scott began screaming at him and calling him a lard ass and a fat ass. Things got nasty when the child tried to stop Tadek from harming his mother. Scott went back upstairs and was pushing his mum around inside the kitchen. He stepped between the two and Scott knocked him to the ground. He fell to the floor and he was crying because it hurt. Under a plea bargain, Scott Tadek was found guilty of criminal battery. On October the 13th, 1998, he was ordered to stay in the local jail for 135 days. 7 years later, at the time of Teresa's disappearance, Tadek was working the overnight shift at the aluminum foundry near Manitrox downtown. All of a sudden, the Sakiki letter arrived in Green Bay suggesting Teresa's body was incinerated. Was the Wisconsin aluminum factory plant in Manitrox central to the missing photographer's dismemberment, get it right in a minute? Was Sakiki an illiterate worker's best attempt at trying to identify Tadek by his nickname of Skinny at the foundry? As of 2006, plant foreman Keith Schaefer had known Tadek for 9 years. Keith went on to say he had been hearing Scott Tadek telling some of the workers in the plant about information on the Teresa Halbach murder homicide investigation. Keith had heard that Scott had not shown up for work on October 31st, 2005. However, he had heard he went to see his mother in the hospital. Scott had been telling people he had seen the fire on Halloween by Stephen Avery, and Scott or the other people made it sound like he had gotten out of the vehicle and actually talked to Steve by the fire. Keith also heard from other guys that Scott had noticed stains on the pants and shirts of one of Barbara's kids. As many people may remember, the prosecution maintained the infamous bleached blue jeans belonged to Avery's mentally disabled nephew, Brendan. Attorney Zellner strongly suspects that any cryptic conversations were not in regard to Avery's slow nephew. Rather, any phone calls made to Tadek at the Wisconsin aluminum foundry concerned Bob's other son, Bobby. After all, Brendan, 16, and Scott Tadek had nothing in common and had no relationship whatsoever. On the other hand, Bobby and Tadek were tight. After Teresa went missing, Keith described Scott as being very edgy lately, a short-tempered, angry person. Keith said he is a chronic liar and does not really get along with a lot of people at the plant and would never know when he would blow up at somebody. Keith felt Scott also knew more about the murder than he had told people. And Keith felt Scott could be very capable of the murder or knowing something more. Yet all the while, Tadek's romantic relationship with Barb remained fine. However, because of the case, he did seem disturbed by what was going on, Schaefer said. After Stephen was arrested, Scott had thought it had been a setup and that he was being framed. However, a week later, Scott did not believe this anymore and thought Stephen was guilty. Interesting, that, isn't it? You know, he's going around saying, oh, he thinks Stephen's guilty. Just a week later. Yeah, okay. For me, as I've said before, it's always been the case, hasn't it, that when you get two people alibying one another in a not very very good way, just passing each other on the road. You know, you can't. All you can do is alibi one person's point for that split second. What else can you do? Anyway, hope you found that little bit of the Wrecking Crew interesting. I mean, the whole book, honestly, if you haven't got it yet, really must get it and read it and find out more about the case. But like I said, in the same way that we've got Mike Halbach seemingly knowing about the demise of Teresa before we've even found any of her remains, you know, he then qualifies the statement that the grieving process could last days, weeks, years, hopefully with Teresa still in our life. Well, if the Sikiki letter is telling us that the body was burnt, and by the body, as I say, we mean the torso, because obviously the other parts were, I think, pretty obviously burnt in a burn barrel. But clearly this sort of dismemberment took place. And we hear, don't we, of the fact that it was proven very difficult to burn a whole body. A lot easier if you know, I know this sounds pretty gruesome, but if you dismember the body and take the bit that you're finding difficult to get rid of and just throw it into an aluminium foundry fire, a smelter, where the temperature gets incredibly hot. Again, just like a crematorium. Anyway, hope you find that chapter 5 of John Frax interesting, and we'll catch you all again soon. Take care. Bye for now.